Hello, everyone. Hope each of you that's listening is well. And as we continue on with our course, today I want to talk somewhat briefly about intelligence and memory and look at it as we go through adulthood. It's an interesting topic, I think, because there are all kinds of stereotypes that exist about aging and how it affects our ability to think clearly. And I guess even more common is aging and memory. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to people, and if they forget something, they'll say, "Oh, see, I'm getting old." And forgetting, though, is not just a part of being old, it's a part of being young. And those of you that are younger could probably testify to this. We forget all kinds of things and for all kinds of reasons. But let's dive right in and begin talking about intelligence and memory. When we look at the age changes in overall intelligence, we do have to concede that, as with everything else, going from our 20s to 90s or whatever it is, there does seem to be some general decline with age. And again, as we've reiterated again and again, and as you've read in your textbook, that's not surprising because age brings some decrease in just about every single capacity we can possibly imagine. We do have to point out that there has been some confusion with some research studies over the years, and this confusion sometimes has come from the type of study, whether it's a true longitudinal study or a cross-sectional study. And so there certainly was a generally received and accepted idea that in the 40s was when we began the decline. Recent research shows that that's not really true. And of course, we'll talk about the crystallized and fluid intelligence, as you can see on the screen in front of you. It's not nearly as true as what we thought it was, that there's a decline in the 40s. Rather, there tends to be small declines, but the big substantial declines don't really emerge for most people, as far as research studies goes, until the 80s. So if you are in your 40s or 50s or 60s or even 70s, good news is that your ability to think clearly and cognitively engage your world hasn't decreased substantially. In other words, like a cliff. And that happens for most people if it does in the 80s. We do want to mention what's called the Flynn effect, and the Flynn effect based after the guy Flynn, who, I don't think his name was Errol, but who did notice in looking at IQ tests that the good news is we all seem to be getting a little smarter. In other words, the Flynn effect points out the fact that IQ scores overall with each generation seem to be getting higher. Now, that shouldn't be. IQ should be one of those things which is relatively fixed, but when we look at our IQ scores and the validity and reliability of IQ scores. In other words, if you think of IQ scores, they should remain fixed. Intelligence should be something independent of, for instance, school and education, and quite frankly, the effect of technology on us. All kinds of technological innovations which allow us to, for instance, just grapple with information constantly. I don't know if you're like me, but I'm constantly in the process of reading something, listening to something through podcasts, engaging, I guess, new learning through documentaries. There's a way in which technology gives us the opportunity to engage our cognitive capacities in numerous different ways. I mean, just the availability of books. We don't even barely use books now, but the content out there. So the Flynn effect, we want to mention that because there's an average increase in IQ, which means that the decrease that starts with aging is going to be less precipitous because we're again starting on average with higher IQs than people from several generations ago. Now, we want to make the big point that there's two types of intelligence that have been identified. One, crystallized intelligence, which is actually seems to increase with age. In other words, when we talk about overall intelligence, we have this kind of effect where one slowly rises as we age, while fluid intelligence slowly decreases as we age. So if I could put it this way, if we're thinking of crystallized intelligence, really we're talking about skills and knowledge which is based upon experience, can I say, even education, our engagement with the world around us, the verbal skills that we gradually accumulate, particularly if we're constantly, reading and writing and so on and so forth. So it really is a kind of aggregated, it's intelligence based upon aggregated experience. The longer you live, you figure the more experience you have, the more opportunities you've had to try to solve puzzles, and then leverage that past experience in solving similar problems, puzzles that you've seen before. So we might want to think of crystallized intelligence in some ways as wisdom, although not exactly the same, but it's simply the ability to use experience to address issues and problems that we find ourselves facing. Fluid intelligence, on the other hand, tends to be way more related to biology, and it's kind of raw processing speed. It's the ability of the cognitive processes in your brain to do things quickly and to reason abstractly. So it's certainly logical that fluid intelligence, think of fluid as water which can go in any direction, fill any hole, so on and so forth, would be associated with brains that are younger, just like an engine works better when it's new as opposed to when it's old. And in some ways, fluid intelligence is what we use to solve problems that we've never seen before. And as I mentioned in one of our earlier lectures, this is one of the reasons why big inventions tend to be done by younger people. Bill Gates and maybe Elon Musk could be two examples that are current. Their big breakthroughs came in their 20s and 30s, and while their companies certainly have had other breakthroughs, the two of them, maybe Elon Musk is an exception to this, they are kind of riding on their laurels. So when we look at fluid versus crystallized intelligence, and we relate it to aging in general, it seems like a nice balance that when we're younger, our brains are quick, they're fast, they're speedy, but we don't have a lot of experience. We don't have a lot of information to rely on to guide us on how to solve this problem. And again, as we age, the fluid intelligence line on a graph, slowly goes down, but the sheer aggregation of experience as we go through life, that crystallized intelligence is going to go up. So it almost seems like we adjust. And again, I used this example before, but if you just think of an athlete, someone that's a superb athlete in their, say, early 20s is going to be faster, quicker. Their physical abilities are going to be at their peak. But that doesn't necessarily mean they're really good, let's say, at football. And let's take a quarterback. The quarterback could be good, could think clearly, but without the experience of games, game after game after game, 10 years of not only games but playoff games, you could see that an older quarterback, while being slower, less physically adept, has all that experience to rely on, in which, if we just take football, because if we're talking about the NFL, can leverage that and say, okay, I've been in this situation many times. Do I scramble? Do I go back? Do I throw the ball, away, and so on and so forth? So certainly that's an important point here of difference. Now, here's just an example clearly of what I was talking about before in terms of cross-sectional data, which is the black line going down, and then what we really probably more realistic is the blue line. And again, you can see that in some ways changes in IQ stay relatively constant and in some ways increase, because IQ is not just raw intellectual ability. It is slightly impacted by educational opportunity and experience and so on and so forth. And so you can see that until we were really 60, there's not really much decrease in raw IQ. Now we do get a decrease and slow decrease, and the slope is slow. But it's really when we hit that 81, the second to the right category, that it seems to start going down precipitously. So this is just a figure which is illustrating, maybe some of the changes in the way aging has affected us. And honestly, 1977 is 40 years ago or so, 30 years ago, 30 plus years ago. The changes in understanding, we don't really know why this is, but the blue line is probably a much more realistic picture of how at least IQ tends to be affected as we age. And so I find myself right at 60, so I guess I'm looking forward to kind of a slope decline. Those of you that are down here, in the younger category, congratulations. You can just look forward to getting a little bit smarter as you go through based upon your experience. Now, with regard to, can we say maybe reverse incline or slowing down the decline in intellectual abilities? We absolutely know, and you don't even need some lecture to tell you this, that if you have lifestyle habits which are healthy all around, you eat healthy, you get enough sleep, there's not huge amounts of stress and strain, long-term, heavy-duty stress in your life, there's a relative balance in your life between work and rest, and importantly, and very importantly, physical exercise. We know that those things are hugely helpful. So for instance, if I could just throw something in there, we know that the generation of new neurons in your nervous system, and again, in your brain, which is obviously very connected with cognitive capacity, neurogenesis is positively impacted by sleep, by engaging in interesting tasks that you don't find work, like Sudoku or crossword puzzles or all kinds of things. And most importantly, physical exercise in addition to sleep. These things do slow down, and in some cases even reverse declines in intellectual capabilities. Even in component training, and by component, we're just simply talking about technological things to engage in. Computers and certain computer games. I used to love playing that trivia game. I forgot what it's called. And I really enjoy constantly reading about this and that. Really, we can summarize this to the extent you remain actively, cognitively, emotionally, spiritually engaged in your environment, the world around you, the people around you, you will slow down to the extent you're isolated, lonely, alone, not actively engaged in processing the world. You're going to experience, if you don't use it, you're going to lose it. Numerous studies have found that even one's predicted lifespan is highly affected by the extent to which you're engaged in the world. And that's why, personally, I can't ever imagine retiring if retirement means I'm just going to go off and sit somewhere and, play golf. I don't even like golf. And just kind of sit somewhere and rock in my chair. I can't imagine again, not being very actively engaged, maybe not a full-time job, but in that case, actively engaged in ministries in my church, and who knows what. And that is again, hugely important in terms of reversing these declines. Here's an interesting research study from your textbook, which just really shows what we're talking about here. That, as I've said in previous lectures, I have my parents are still alive. They're both now 86, and they are very engaged in just about everything you can possibly imagine. I think that they're about as healthy psychologically and cognitively as you can be when you're 86. But they're always playing games. Whenever I visit them, for instance, we get to church early, and to beat the traffic, that's my dad's excuse. But we sit in the car for 20 minutes, and they always have this word game they play. And I play with them, and hands down, they always beat me. When we're sitting around, we'll play a game. For instance, they'll pick a long word, and then you got 5 minutes to come up with every short word you can possibly come from the letters. And I remember the first few times I played them, I thought, okay, I'm going to beat my parents. I'm a college professor. I'm constantly reading. I was in for a big dose of humility. They killed me, both of them, especially my dad. They came up with sometimes 2 and 3 times the number of words I could. And again, this illustration would show that as we age, simply because we have a lifetime of reading, and if you are reading and constantly engaged in writing in particular, this mental exercise of engaging in crossword puzzles, you're going to know more words. You're going to know how to use them, when to use them. And again, there's all kinds of things that affect this. If you're a big reader and not just a reader of the newspaper, but you challenge yourself with reading, which is a little, which is challenging, you're going to slowly accumulate not only the number of words, but how you appropriately use them in context. So that's the good news. So before I go on, if you want to slow down the cognitive effects of aging, stay engaged, read, write. I think writing is hugely important, because writing is thinking, which you do on a piece of paper. Stay engaged with friends, family, church, activities. Get sleep, get exercise. Hugely important. Now, just a couple things, just a couple slides on memory here. We want to just talk about memory and the different types of memory. So primary memory would be kind of our ability to, I got to put this, passively maintain the retention of information, including, can we say, most of college, which is pointless information you're never going to use again. And so with primary memory, we do know that that's associated with fluid intelligence. Your ability, for instance, to memorize large amounts of data is going to slowly get less efficient as you age. So it's a good thing that college, which involves a lot of that, is and high school is for younger people. Now, working memory is clearly we used to call this short-term memory. This is the amount of information we can hold at any one point while we process things. And so if you think about memory, we have something called sensory memory, which I didn't put on the slide here. But sensory memory is it's the kind of recorder in my brain, sound recorder, visual recorder. It's about 5 seconds long. Working memory is when I'm focusing on something and concentrating and processing. So I'm bringing not only what my present experience is, which would be sensory memory, but I'm bringing long-term memory, what I know about this situation or similar situations. So it is the ability to cognitively engage my environment. Now, we can say that primary memory remains relatively stable, and it does decline a little bit. In other words, our ability to remember information, but working memory, the ability to process it in real time, definitely declines with age. So again, it's not surprising that this would be a sub point of fluid intelligence. The ability to process quickly something. Now, we account or adjust that a little bit because, again, as I said before, my sheer computer processing speed may decline, i.e. with working memory, but because I have more stored in long-term memory and more experience, what we tend to do is we tend to get a little more efficient in working memory, even though we're not as quick. So as I was saying before, there's a kind of balance here. And the last thing we have to talk about is what I just put here is executive function, or what memory specialists call the central executive. It's a part of working memory, and it's the part in kind of which is deciding what we're going to concentrate on. It's deciding how we're going to focus, and this does slowly decrease with age. In other words, the ability to stay focused, particularly when we consider it to be hard work, does decrease with age. But again, if I could put the other side of the story, as we age, we tend to lose the ability to work harder, but we gain the ability to work smarter. In other words, you can get more done in less time if you're more efficient. So instead of just saying, okay, we need these bricks, move over here. Well, I'm younger, I can move the bricks quickly because I can, I'm quick. I have, my muscles are stronger. But an older person might say, well, let me just go get a wheelbarrow, pile it up, and in other words, the outcome may be the same, and actually the older person may do it better because it's not just sheer ability, but it's how do I focus that ability on doing this better. And so forth. Here's a figure from your textbook that you'll look at, and I just want you to see that, as we already mentioned, you can see here verbal knowledge, which is this round one, that again tends to slowly increase with the figure I showed you with the New York Times crossword puzzle, at least into our 70s. But you can see that everything else goes down. Everything else from our 20s into our 80s is on a downward slope because, to summarize this, speed of processing, working memory, indeed, even it's not that my long-term memory goes down, it's that my access to long-term memory goes slowly down. And so this really, and you can see that really we do have a somewhat of a gentle slope here for most of these, but and again, we don't see a big decrease starting in the 40s as we used to think. It's relatively gentle again until we get to our 70s and 80s, and then the decrease is relatively significant. Now, in terms of wrapping up, because I did say this was going to be short, I just want to talk about other types of memory. So, declarative memory and non-declarative memory, we want to just talk about this. So, non-declarative or procedural memory is, again, highly based upon experience. It involves skill learning. It involves retention. It's literally how to do something. This is why we've all heard the phrase that once you learn to ride a bike, you'll never lose it, and it's exactly true. That any time we've engaged in some task that involves a procedure of step A, step B, step C, step D, we're always going to retain it. And so, with regard to non-declarative memory, it's skill learning, and so and we can always learn new skills. This is one of the things to keep our brain engaged, is always pursuing something different. And I don't know about you, but I get these bursts of interest. So I probably already said it, but about 2 years ago, I got, for some reason, really, really interested in, I've always been interested in history, but particularly the history of the Crusades, which, again, is completely useless information. I mean, when am I going to use that? I listened to hundreds of hours of podcasts and read books and looked up things, but I was just interested in this. Now, eventually my interest waned, and now I'm on to, I guess, my latest interest is reading about stress and how stress affects us, and perhaps because I have some people in my life who are highly stressed, and I've had a fairly highly stressful life for a variety of reasons, and so I'm interested in how stress works, and so on and so forth. But skill learning and retention important. Now, declarative memory would relate to particularly content or data, and both of these things are quite important, and they do decline. But the declarative memory, again, which is much more based upon sheer power, that declines a little more than non-declarative memory or procedure memory, because as we age from 20 to 30 and 30 to 40, we have more opportunity to have engaged in tasks, activities, which are procedural, and then we can leverage those as we face a new situation. Perspective memory, this is remembering, this is the memory that is most associated with aging. In other words, I got to remember to do this, or I need to remember to pay my bills, or I need to remember to stop for half and half on my way home. So it's pretty much, I need to remember this. And I found, even when I was younger, even in my 20s and 30s, I found that I often thought of something, and if I didn't write it down, so I'm one of those people that keeps an ongoing running list of things that I need to do, because I find, and I don't find, quite frankly, that I'm worse at that at age 60 now than I was at 30 and 40. Now, so perspective memory, there's this stereotype that old people forget to do something. And since it is dependent upon that central executive in working memory, the research shows that it decreases as we age. But other research shows that our forgetting tends to be less a function of aging and a function of other factors going on. So, for instance, if you're in a very highly stressful, you got a lot going on emotionally, you're going to be more forgetful. If you have, if you come up with ways in which you make sure that you do everything you need to do, i.e. writing down lists, whether you're older, whether you're young, you're not going to be relying on the necessity of remembering something later. And how many times have I gotten up in the morning and go to make my coffee and I'm like, I was supposed to get half and half yesterday. So now I just write it down. Of course, I forget to look at my list. So these kind of memories, again, all intertwined. And so our really takeaway here is that when we look at intelligence and memory, there is big takeaway. There is a decrease over time. But smaller takeaways is those decreases, in a general sense, have to be nuanced by particular capabilities in terms of intelligence and memory. And again, third minor takeaway is that as we age, some things actually do improve. So thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next lecture. Bye-bye.